Thank you. My name is Huang Miller. I'm one of the MCs tonight. Tonight we're doing a wonderful... Hello? There we go. It's like up and down, up and down. Tonight we have a wonderful tribute to Al Mans. We have Denise Mintz Harris, his daughter, Kevin Harris. Sugar Sullivan's on the screen there. And my lovely assistant, Andrea, is here to help us tonight. So, we're just gonna get started. That's cool with everybody. So, first question.
One needs receipts. Wait, one needs receipts. One needs receipts. One needs receipts.
So, the first question is I kind of want everybody...
Hello, Kevin. Hi, Kevin. We never met.
She's not doing that to me. She went here.
Sugar, are you ready?
Hello, Sugar.
Hi. Good to meet you.
For the people who don't know, can you explain who Al Mans was for us?
So, first of all, I'm here because of Al Mans. He's my dad. And when he was 7 years old, there was the great migration of black people from the south going north, and he and my grandmother went to New York, where they found, actually the reason why my grandmother went was because, you know, my grandfather was always sending money, but he was supposed to send enough for them to come up, and that wasn't happening. So my grandmother, being my grandmother, she's like, let's go see what he's doing up in New York. And when she got to New York, she was like, oh, no, that's messy. He had another girlfriend. It was crazy. So...
We're going to begin with the tea.
Yeah, so she started doing hair for prostitutes at 25 cents a head. And my dad began dancing on the corners of Harlem at 8 years old. And discovered, he had a natural talent and love for it. At that time, they weren't doing the Lindy Hop, they were doing it Charleston and things like that. And he had a whole crew of friends because it was the Depression. He was born in 1920. And things were financially, you know, when America gets a cold, black folks get pneumonia, so it was bad. And so he and his friends would work the corners and have their hats and have their money. And he would take the money home to my grandmother. And he continued to dance. And then he became, at 18, he won the Harvest Moon Ball. And from that point, he danced for the rest of his life. I mean, from time to time, I've seen him do interviews. When my father didn't like it, was interviewing him, he didn't always tell the truth. So, and then he'd get a kick out of it. He married my mom when it was illegal in over 30 states. Her family were Jewish Holocaust survivors from Poland. And she also didn't care about the status quo. That was the two driving influences of Al and Audrey Mintz. They looked at the status quo, they figured out did it fit for them, and what didn't fit for them, they didn't follow. For instance, my grandmother, my father's family were what you call Washington Baptists. They were like church. But he was dance. So they didn't want no part of him, and he was fine with that. And my mother's mother, you know, here, I said this last night, and I decided it didn't sound mean, but, you know, here my mother's family is trying to rebuild the Jewish race that just got decimated, and she marries the blackest man in Harlem. So, again, it was this thing of, does this fit for me? And if it doesn't, I can reject it, and that's how he raised his kids. From that point, he, through a series of events, ended up becoming a part of Whitey's Lindy Hoppers out of the Savoy. That's him in the white tuxedo jacket in Hell's a Poppin'. And, you know, he lived, I was talking earlier about how he does know himself the truth. So my dad was a dancer, period. I've seen him tell people, oh, and I worked other jobs. No, he didn't. He danced, period. And I danced, and he dances, and this is my son, and my other son dances, and dance is our legacy. And, you know, at some point, because the major ballrooms closed, the Savoy was no longer there, and all those clubs, the big bands weren't around anymore, they were touring. And so he danced at the barbecues, he danced with friends, he danced with family, but he never stopped dancing. And then a woman by the name of Sandra Schultz saw him dancing at a club in New York. And she was like, I need you to come to my studio and teach that. She was a world-renowned ballroom dancer. So there he was, and he was teaching. And then fast forward to Lawrence, I'm forgetting his last name, at Haran. Leonard. Sorry, Leonard. So Leonard had been having this dance school in Switzerland where he was teaching what he called the jitterbug. And I say that because once he saw my father dance, he's like, we didn't know what we were doing. And so they went to the dance, they came to New York to find him. And they went to the dance studio, and Sandra said, oh, Count Basie's in town, he's probably there. So they went over there, and sure enough, my father was dancing, and as my father tells it, everywhere he danced, they kind of followed him and just watched him. And eventually it was like, well, what do you guys want? And they said, well, we want you to come to Sweden and teach this. And Kevin was just an infant at the time, and my dad called me, and he's like, these people want me to go to Switzerland. Sweden. And he's like, I'm tired. He's like, and what do you think? I said, well, you know, you're not doing that much here. Go. And he's like, well, you know, here's where I'm going to be. If I'm not home in a month, come get me. I said, okay, that's a deal. And when he came home, he was elated. He was ecstatic. He saw that this art he had given his life to was going to continue in an enthusiastic way with a love of the music and the love of the dance. And he's like, I got a sore throat. And, knowing my dad, I'm like, well, I don't know what you've been doing over there, but you better go to the doctor. And he went to the doctor, and he found out he had esophagus cancer. And he died not too long after that. But I always like to say that my dad completed why he was on this earth, which was to become a master of this technique and to pass it on. So that's who Al Menz is.
So I want to call my section of all of the questions the Let's Correct the Wikipedia page. So I want to make sure I have some of these facts right, and by all means, please update that page. It has nothing on your father and your grandfather, and it really doesn't. And there's so much that you've said just in this first 5 minutes that's not on there, and yes, it needs some help.
May I interrupt?
Absolutely.
During that time, before he went to Sweden, that's when I became his dance partner. And then him and I, we did a show at Riverside Church in New York. And these dancers that we had in the show had never even seen Lindy Hop. And we taught them how to Lindy, and we did this show, which was a combination of photos and music and dance that pertained to both of our lives. And it ran for 2 weekends, and we had a full house. It turned out very good. And that was because of who our manager was, Larry Schultz. He was the one that got that started with the show.
Okay, thank you, Sugar. So I want to talk about some of these points and make sure that we have this right. Your father was born in Newport News, Virginia. Born January 1st, 1920. He was an active dancer through the 30s and 40s. He won the Harvest Moon Ball in 1938 at 18 years old. He then went on to be in several movies, including Hell's a Poppin' in 1941, Hot Chocolate in 1941, 1950, The Spirit Moves, and if you haven't seen that, by God, please go and watch that after this, before you come back for the dance, The Spirit Moves. Absolutely.
So, it's important to know not only about Lindy, but what the dance universe was at that time. And there was an amazing choreographer by the name of Katharine Graham, up and coming and making her mark. And she was a Black woman. And so her costuming was very tribal, very Black. I bring this up because I was in Sweden, and a woman comes up to me and she's like, "Hey, what's with that diaper your father wore in Spirit Moves?" I said, "What? What was that diaper?" I said, "That wasn't a diaper, that was a cultural, a cultural costume reflecting the movement." And the interesting piece about my dad in that moment of the video was that when he was dancing improvisationally, he didn't even know they were filming him. He was just dancing because when you hear the music, dancers gotta dance. The spirit moves, and so he liked it so much. They liked it so much, they decided to keep it in the video. So if you haven't seen it, the whole thing is really great to watch. Yeah.
That was 1950, so here's my question. I want to make sure that this is correct. Did your father fight in World War II in 1945?
Yes.
So he was in the Air Force.
Yes.
1945, he was a sergeant in the Air Force, and then he came back and went back to dancing. I'm sorry, I'm just like stuck, because we hear about Al Minns as a dancer, but he lived a full, extremely full life. Not only did he serve our country dancing, but he served our country in World War II, and a lot of them didn't come back. So the fact that he did that, he is the father of 7 children? Is that right?
Well, there are 4 that he had with my mom. When he was a frisky 16-year-old, there was one that he had with the preacher's daughter. I told you he didn't listen to the status quo. And then there was a period when he and my mom separated, and my mom had 2 children that she gave his last name with his permission. So for the sake of accuracy, there was 7 children named Minns. And that's the story.
Then we have more movies. We already talked about The Spirits Moves. We talked 1954 Jazz Dance, Cabin in the Sky. He was a comedian with Leon James. He did Moke and Poke. He was on the Johnny Carson Show. He was a co-author for Jazz Dance, which has Marshall Stern's name on it, but we all know better. He was part of teams Whitey's Lindy Hoppers and the Congaroos. Still shaking yes. His dance partners featured Sandra Gibson, Sandra Pollard, Willa Mae Ricker, of course, Leon James, and Sugar Sullivan. And I just want to make sure he has danced in Hot Mikado with Bill Robinson, Blackbirds of 38 with Lena Korn, Knickerbocker Holiday. You haven't heard of that one yet? Knickerbocker Holiday. All right. He's danced at the Palace, Radio City Music Hall, Cotton Club, Cafe Society, to name a few. Oh my goodness. And then passed away a year or less after going to Stockholm and passing on this legacy in Stockholm at Huang in 1985. Okay, I'm gonna update the page myself. Because everything I've got, there's a lot of information. There's a lot missing from that page. Okay, so I'm gonna pass it on. Just wanna make sure I got these facts right.
So, Sugar, you had the pleasure of dancing with Al. What was the energy level like? What was it like to rehearse with him day in, day out? What years were
very
those?
high. The energy was very high, very high. I look forward to it every day. I did. And I learned so much from them. I really did.
Well, around what year? Hello? Oh,
Say that
we're cutting
again.
in now again. Around what era, what years did you dance with him?
I think it was like 1982 for a couple of years, yeah. And then Larry Schultz got the contract from Leonard to come to Sweden. And I didn't want to go at that time because I had just remarried for the second time. And I said, no. I said, if it was only for like a couple of weeks, I would have gone. But they said, Larry Schultz said it was going to be longer than a couple of weeks. So I said, no. I said, I'd like to buy out if I can. He said, no problem. So they got another girl, a jazz dancer, to go with him to Sweden.
Like, I wish there was more information, you know, because I spend a lot of time looking up dancers, and it's actually difficult to find information on your dad. I don't know if you're aware how difficult it is to find hard information on your dad, and I wish that it was easier to, in general, just yeah. So, you know, one of the things that I learned a while ago, you know, I get to spend time with Chester and talk to him a lot about a lot of different things. But, you know, I just asked you to confirm it, though. But one of the things that I learned was that he helped start the Rhythm Hotshots. And apparently, they had learned everything from video up until that point. They had asked them to come over, and then they got to see the real thing. And that lit him up. Do you know much about that? Do either of you know much about that?
Yes, what they used to do is they used to watch these videos and they would slow them down to figure out the steps that they were doing and the routines that they were doing. They really captured a lot of it. And that was the way that they did it. But then they needed that human touch, you know? That's why they came to Harlem to find, see if there's anyone left that they could find that could teach the Lindy Hop, come there and teach them the spirit and the feeling of Lindy Hop. And that's how they came to find out. That's what they did. They used to slow them down as slow as they could in order to try to figure out the steps that they were doing in these videos.
I'm hoping that everybody's understanding, like, that how important that he was in our history and in our culture as far as spreading this around the world. I mean, there was, yes, please.
So, I remember I was talking to Norma Miller, and she said to me, because of your father, all of us have a second opportunity. She said, your father is why I exist in the community now. Frankie existed. So many of us, if it wasn't for him, would not be here continuing the legacy today. And you know, on another level, Whereas when you see my dad dancing, he's full out, and his face, if you look at him, he's always in this joy. And that's not phony, that is his joy. He's not acting. Joy for him is dance, synonymous. And, but on another level, he was very private. So the reason why there's not a lot written about him is because, you know, he would answer me questions, but he was more interested in talking to me about other kinds of things than himself, which men of that generation who dealt with so much oppression and literally stolen opportunities, they don't talk it up a lot because they don't want to be bitter. I remember being a little girl when Eisenhower was president. I was a little girl, and I was going to school, and they had us climbing under our desks in case there'd be a nuclear bomb. And I came home, and I said something about the communists are going to kill us. And way back then, my father said, no, honey, if we go to war, it's going to be over oil, and it's going to be in the Mideast. I was like, okay. Another interesting thing about my dad, he had a 7th grade education, a formal education, but most of the books that I had to read when I went to college, they were already in his library, particularly if they were about sociology or Black history, because that's what he wanted to talk about. So I grew up, on my coffee table was a book called 100 Amazing Facts About the American Negro by J.A. Rogers. I can see the book now. And there were all these books in my house to make sure I knew who I was, that I was bigger than what was going on in America. That's the context I like to talk about my dad in, because he was bigger than what was going on in America. I remember when he went on the tour in Nigeria, and I had hair down my back. And he left, and I got my hair cut, and I had this big screaming afro, and I was standing there defiantly on the day he came home from Nigeria, waiting for him to say something about my hair. Because at that time, it was pretty controversial to have natural hair. Jeez. And he came home, and he looked at me, and he said, in Nigeria, they would say your hair was still not done. I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, oh, they do ornate braids and beading. I said, no, they don't. No, they don't. You just don't want me to wear my hair like this. He said, you can do whatever you want with your hair. It's yours, but it's not done. So that's what I find fascinating about this Black man who grew up as an artist in an oppressive society, who refused to be any less than what he was, and where he could find his spaces, he took them. And because we were growing up in a dance family, well, when you're a professional artist, it's feast or famine. There are times the money's rolling, and there are times you're eating a lot of pasta. My dad could make pasta in more ways than you could shake a stick. My mother, not so good a cook. Not so good. I don't want to talk about her cooking, but I loved her. She was good in every other way. But she couldn't cook. He could cook. Anyway. So there was one time when we were in the famine lane, you know, lots of pasta lane, and being quiet when the landlord knocking. And he was so excited because he had an opportunity, and you won't see this in Wikipedia either, he had an opportunity to choreograph a Broadway show. I was a kid. I remember this very well. And we were all excited. He got dressed up, and he was smelling really good. And he took off to be with these people. And he came home, and I could tell he'd been crying. His eyes were red and puffy, and I'm like, Papa, what happened? He said, oh yeah, they wanted me to choreograph, but they weren't going to put my name on it. And I looked at him, and I'm like, well, what did you say? He said, I told them to kiss my ass. So we had a few more weeks eating pasta. And while I didn't understand it then, I grew to understand just what he was role modeling for me. So that when I grew up and I became a Black Panther and I was a social activist, he had my back. There were times I was sure I was going to get arrested, and it was time to tell him that I'll probably get arrested tomorrow. Because we were doing this action against Columbia University in New York. They owned a lot of the tenements in Harlem, and this particular tenement, a 5-year-old kid had fallen down the elevator shaft and died. So we'd been protesting and doing a lot of actions to try to get Columbia to fix up those buildings that were so dilapidated. And my dad thought I was going to school every day because he was a fanatic about that. And instead, I was going to hang out the Black Panther headquarters, and I was one of the youth leaders. So the day came for the action. I've been clipping out all my little, the youth spokesman said, because they figured at that time they weren't killing young girls, whatever. So they would put me up to have me do the talking. And so it was time to tell Papa, I'm going to do this and I'll probably be arrested. And again, I had my defiance going on. And I showed him all the clippings. I said, you see that youth spokesman? That was me. And I'm probably going to go to jail tomorrow. And he said to me, and I was braced for him to shake me or something. And instead he said, I'm so proud of you. I wish there was something like this when I was a kid. I would have been in the front of it too. And if I have to mortgage this house, you won't be in jail any longer than it takes me to get down there and get you out. So he had my back, you know? Yeah. And so he was this fascinating Renaissance man. He was so ahead of himself. And he took such joy in dance, and he traveled the world, and he always let me know that who I am and what we are is bigger than what's immediately in front of us, and that we should be bigger than what's immediately in front of us, you know? So because of his encouragement, as a 10th grader, I talked my way into college as 16 years old and became even more of an activist, but that's another story. I'm talking about me and not my dad. But, and my friends from college, who I'm still online with, they remember the day that we had a Black History Weekend, and we brought my dad out to do a day of teaching dance and lecturing about the history of jazz dance, real jazz dance in America. Any questions? Any comments, Sugar?
No, I'm just enjoying what you're saying. I'm learning so much about him.
Yeah,
And I didn't know completely, you know. He reminded me a lot of my mother. His ideals and the way he taught, you know, the way my mother used to teach and the way she taught to us also. And the books that we had in my house, you know, a lot of Black history. And we had books on Black history and American Indian history. Because my father was Cherokee.
Ah, okay.
Yeah. So they were a lot alike in their thinking from what I'm hearing now, yes.
I always enjoy this more when it becomes a dialogue. Does anybody have any questions or comments?
I think the question was, growing up, was there a moment you realized that your father was part of this larger history, like his, existence in the dad space? When did you realize that your father was who he was to everyone else? Does that make sense?
Who thinks their father's a big deal? He was my dad. You know what I mean? And now I think he's a big deal. But who thinks of their dad as a big? I mean, you know, you have to understand, I didn't know until 5 years ago that all this was happening. I didn't know. When he died and his connection to Sweden died, then so did mine. So I had no idea how this art was flourishing internationally. And then because Kevin, this one, my son, because he was posting stuff, and correct me if I'm wrong, I know you will. He was posting stuff about my dad, and someone named Judy Pritchett contacted him and said, "Are you Almonds? Are you related?" And he's like, "Oh yeah." And she's like, "Oh, want to go to Sweden? Want to talk about your grandfather?" And he says, "Well, the one to talk about my grandfather is my mom, because I was an infant when he passed." When I went to Huang, and I saw like 1,000 people from like dozens of countries, I just cried. I still am so moved that you guys are even sitting here and give a damn to hear about him. I mean, I'm so moved that I can even share anything about him. So I knew he was a big deal about 5 years ago. Up until then, he was just my very eccentric, unusual dad, you know, who said a lot of unusual things.
I have a question unless someone else has a question. All right, here's my question. Kevin. Kevin, you have a sort of unique perspective on all of this. We are further removed than you are, but you're in some way removed because you were an infant when your grandfather passed. But you obviously have benefited from this legacy. It's natural, but it's also nurture, because I'm sure that your mother encouraged all of your creative inspiration. But tell me, how do you feel your grandfather's presence in your life? How do you feel influenced by having that be part of your lineage?
I guess I gotta talk to a mic, huh? So, for the most part, let's hold this away. It's more like what I tell my students is, why do you dance? What's your end goal? And after hearing the whole entire list of blockbuster videos, he is my motivation. Like, I want to be him at his status. So when I found out he did a movie, I had to be in a movie. When I found out he started doing TV shows, I did TV shows. And so that's my real motivation is, if my grandfather can do it, why can't I? You know what I mean? And even growing up, I didn't know who he was. I just saw these big, gigantic tap shoes, and so I would just stomp all over the place. I didn't grow up knowing who Al Menz is at all. I had the option of looking into dance more, or doing something else, walking dogs, who knows. But that's how it was. And then I started doing my research, and I was like, oh dang, you did a whole lot of stuff. And then probably a full 24 hours of just doing research, which, like you said, you can't find that much on him unless you go straight to the source. You might want to get on Wikipedia and do a fact check. I'm just saying, just go for it. But it helps, but at the same time, I like people not really knowing who I really am in that relationship, because I don't really like, oh, look, that's Al Menz's man. So no, I'm a beast on my own, just like he is. And so, you know what I mean? So I mean, that's mainly it. My motivation is that list that's in your hand. And that's what keeps moving me forward. Injured, not injured, whatever the case is, it's knowing that at the end of the day, I can say, what I do for a living in hip hop was given to me by him more than anything. The Charleston, the Top Rock, Lindy Hop as a whole, it kind of, if you think about it, gave birth to a lot of hip hop steps. And a lot of people don't really acknowledge that or know that. Hip hop is not randomly to my, oh my God, here's hip hop. Like, realistically, that doesn't happen. It all comes from something else. Like, hip hop is nothing more than a whole bunch of steps taken from a lot of different genres, and you just change up the beat, and then there you go. That's really all it is, let's be honest. So, yeah, he's my motivation. I didn't grow up knowing who he was. It was probably by the time I was 16, and then I did Brothers of the Night for Miss Allen, which there's a big Lindy Hop scene. And then Norma Miller popped up. I didn't know who she was. Like, oh, who's this Queen of Swing? And I saw the DVD, like, that's not her. On the cover of that. And she's like, you remind me of someone. I was like, who do I remind you of? She said, Al Mills. I was like, oh, turn up. That's my grandfather. No, legit. Like, I don't know. So I'm like, oh, turn up. That's my grandfather. She's like, dang. And then the second time I saw her, no, legit. She said, dang, just like that. And then I saw her in Sweden. And she snatched me up real quick. She said, come here, grandson. I was like, huh? She said, come here, grandson. And you know, she started giving me food and whatnot. I'm like, okay, I'm kind of full, but I'm not going to be, this is Norma Miller. I'm not going to be disrespectful. So no, I'm not stupid. So we're having a soda, whatever, and she's giving me food, and then she starts telling me a whole lot of stories. Again, you're not going to find on Wikipedia. Like, they were stuck in Brazil. They couldn't come back. They were stuck in Brazil. They couldn't come back. Every single time they were traveling, like, you know what? Let's just hang out in Brazil for like 4 weeks. And so they hung out in Brazil for 4 weeks. Who does that? They did. You know, so it's, yeah. I want to get to a point where I can just hang out in Brazil for 4 weeks. Not worry about anything. How about you? It's okay. You're not getting me none.
You know, I wanted to say this. One of the things my father was asked that he talked about was where the aerials came from. And he said that a lot of the aerials came from mistakes. And that he'd be dancing and there would be this mistake and they would catch her and then he's like, wait a minute, let's work on that. And so they would make lemonade out of lemons. When someone could have injured themselves, they actually took the corrective action to make it an aerial. And he said that when something shifted in him after he came back from Africa. Because so much of the Lindy movements and jazz movements, like the camel walk and things like that, when he went to Africa, he saw the same movements. So jazz, the whole scheme of it is very natural movement, because African dance is very natural movement. And I was sitting in Kevin's hip hop class today, and so much of it looked African, and so much of it looked like jazz, vernacular jazz. And so it's all movement at the end of the day is very connected, you know, because it's all very, very natural if you go with it, as opposed to work against it. The one thing he used to tease me about was ballet, because ballet is very unnatural movement. You're not supposed to be walking around with your hips turned out. That's how you get injured, you know. Even though it's beautiful when executed, Kevin's a beautiful ballet dancer. He doesn't like me to talk about it. But I'll tell you this, Alonzo King Lyons Ballet, they wanted him as an apprentice to their professional program. No, this is okay, this is a mama boast. When Kevin said he's gonna be a dancer, he started out with hip hop, with a large dance company called Rhythm Nation. And then we're driving home one day from a Rhythm Nation rehearsal, and Debbie Allen's on the radio talking about she's gonna open her studio.
Yeah, it's funnier if I say it. So basically, I'm gonna say this really, really quick, so I hope you guys stick along for the ride. So basically, we're in the car, and on the radio it says, oh, now auditioning for the Debbie Allen Dance Academy. I'm like, oh, turn up again, whatever, let's go home. I'd rather play basketball. She bets me $20 I can't get in the academy. That day, I won $20. Boom. in my money.
But I won because he spent the next 9 years studying ballet, jazz, tap, hip hop, African, flamenco, modern, Cirque du Soleil area. And I remember, I'm in New Orleans watching him in the show, and he was like, Mom, mail me my white tap shoes. I'm like, why does he want? And I'm sitting there in the audience next to Debbie, and here he comes out doing a tap solo in white tap shoes. So my only goal with him was, just like my father had mastered 15, 16 different genres of jazz dance, if he was going to be a dancer, he had to be a master too. And so I made sure that whatever the job was, he could audition and nail it. And so, and then he became Debbie's protege. He produced 9 shows with her. And, you know, it's been, all I can say is the legacy continues. And I didn't talk about it, but I was a dancer. I performed with my dad in New York a few times. Showtime after we follow. Oh yeah, this is an interesting story. My dad was, I think he was in South America, and my mom got it in her head because she liked Duke Ellington, and he was playing at the Apollo, and it was the amateur night, and so she got it in her mind that I should go and do what my dad had taught me in the amateur night, and so I did, and I won. And when Duke Ellington said, well, little lady, I think maybe I was 10, 11, well, little lady, what's your name? I said, my name is Denise Mins, and he's like, Al Mins' daughter? And I said, yeah, and he's like, ladies and gentlemen, he made a big deal about it. It was all a lot of fun. And, you know, in those days, like, that wasn't done. So, it was a different experience for me.
I can relate. You can't see me, but I'm Sugar's granddaughter. I knew my grandmother all the time. High school, she performed any play. The teacher said, oh, we're going to do black dance, or we're going to do dance. We started doing dance. It didn't look like regular dance. So I asked my grandmother, can you come and help me here? Help my class? I didn't know who she was, just like you, until she went into that ballroom that you're sitting in right now. And everybody was sugar this, sugar that, sugar, sugar. There was a fella that stood across the ballroom, and we're sitting across the other side in the little sitting area. And he had been sculpting my grandmother for the whole weekend. He finally came over and stood next to me. I had to say hello to him. He says, I just want to talk to your grandmother. You can talk to her. Go over there and talk to her. I don't want to disturb her. You're fine. Just go talk to her. It was amazing that weekend. Because I found out people came from Midwest to see my grandmother. People came across the country to see my grandmother, like, oh, she's a big deal. Okay. I feel like you. I feel like
It is, yeah. So I just want to thank all of you again for being here. Sugar Sullivan, Denise Harris, Kevin Harris, and your hosts, Javon Miller and Andrea Gordon. Thank you so much for spending this time and sharing your experiences with the Almans. And I hope that you will actually do your own research and find every opportunity you can to speak with people who are connected in some way to our original dancers. When you see Sugar, talk to Sugar, get as much information and knowledge as you can. She loves to communicate with people and connect with people. And don't be afraid. Take these opportunities where you can, because we won't have them forever. Thank you so much, everyone.